She caught her husband trying to vanish $400 million before breakfast, and she let him think she was blind. Amina felt the hook of that truth set deep the moment Kato swept into the kitchen with a smile pressed thin as a razor, phone glued to his palm, and wedding ring catching the pale Kampala sun like it belonged to someone else. The morning had all the props of peace: tea hissing in the kettle, Zuri humming over crayons, the scent of cardamom and new bread. But the scene felt staged, as if a camera were somewhere just off to the left, recording the moment a life pivoted on a whisper. "Meeting at 7, Kato said, already turning, already gone in his head. Amina stirred sugar into his mug and watched the swirl unspool, the way patterns betray their center. He no longer left his phone on the counter. He tucked it under his thigh, carried it into the shower, slept with it under his pillow like a talisman against guilt. When the door clicked behind him, the house sighed. Zuri looked up. "Mom, will Daddy come to my assembly?" "He will," Amina lied gently, placing a kiss on her daughter's crown and tucking a curl behind a small ear that trusted the world. After drop-off, the silence pressed close, thick with the tiny sounds people make when pretending not to be afraid. Amina walked the corridors of her own home as if it had shifted overnight. The pictures smiled from the walls, but the eyes inside them knew. Kato's study still smelled of leather and printer heat. Files sat in obedient rows, his habit of labeling everything a comfort she had once called admirable. She opened a cabinet, then another, insurance, tax, receipts, until her fingers paused over a tab solemnly titled Legal. She did not pray, she prepared. Inside, the pages wore the crisp certainty of paper that expected to be believed. Petition for dissolution, draft property schedule where her name had been erased like chalk, a memo on interim custody optics, as if Zuri were a lens to be turned toward advantage. Her throat tried to close. She made it open. Phone in hand, she photographed lines, stamps, signatures, each little cruelty that insisted it was just business. Outside, Boda engines stitched the street with nerves. Inside, a clock dared her to be slow. She slid everything back precisely and returned the key to its hook, because order was a weapon she would keep. On the dresser upstairs, Kato's other god vibrated. 1, 2, 3 times, anxious heartbeat inside a slab of glass. She knew the passcode because love had taught her many numbers. She entered their wedding date, and the world parted. This intimacy tasted like rust. Threads bloomed across the screen. Blackwood advocates confirming documents and strategy. A saved contact named Nelady Ntuli, pushing consultation invoices through like clean knives. Unknown numbers offering offshore solutions dressed as safety. "She won't see it coming," one message read, arrogance spelling her name in the negative. Amina did not break, she balanced. She set the phone exactly where it had been, screen dimmed, lies sleeping. On the balcony, Kampala sprawled bright and indifferent, taxis bargaining with noon, hawkers calling the day into shape. She wrapped herself in the ordinary, the laundry to fold, the onions to chop, the permission slip to sign, and underneath it threaded a cord of steel. Fear is loud, resolve is organized. She texted Mujeri, "Tea?" and met her at a cafe where the cups were chipped and the music knew how to stay out of the way. Amina laid the facts down like dominoes and watched Mujeri's face harden from concern into strategy. "Call Tunde," Mujeri said, sliding a number across the table. "He follows money like a dog follows a scent." Amina saved it under nothing obvious and memorized it anyway. When she returned home, she moved as if nothing had shifted. Pilau simmering, homework checked, laughter offered in measured spoonfuls. Kato arrived late with a bouquet purchased by guilt and a story polished by practice. She accepted both, arranging the flowers and the fiction with equal care. Zuri danced her drawing across the room. 3 figures beneath a mango tree, the sun fat and happy, and asked if they could go to the lake on Saturday. "We'll see," Amina said, and felt the lake rise inside her, deep and cold and wakeful. In the shower, steam erased the mirror. In the bedroom, his phone trembled again. She let it. There is a discipline to not touching what you could destroy. At midnight, when the house exhaled into sleep, Amina stood by the window and counted assets, risks, allies, hours until dawn. She wrote her war in 4 quiet lines on a folded receipt slipped into her bra. Verify, record, freeze, protect Zuri. Then she slept briefly.
By dawn, Amina's resolve had cooled into form, the way steel remembers the mold that birthed it, and she dialed the number Njeri had pressed into her palm, introducing herself as if she were placing a bead on a string, steady, precise, offering only what was needed. Tunde Adebayo met her in an office that smelled faintly of lemon oil and new wiring. Whiteboards climbed the wall with flowcharts like rivers braiding toward a dark sea. He listened without performance, eyes on the photographs she slid across, legal drafts stripped of her name, property schedules that treated her as a ghost, the phrase interim custody optics underlined by a stranger's pen, and when she finished, he pushed a laptop toward the center of the table and said almost kindly, "We read the money." He synced her banking apps to a quiet storm of alerts and showed her where to step without leaving footprints, how to download statements without firing a log, how to set view only on joint accounts, how to copy metadata before someone decided to rewrite the past. He sketched Cato's world as a topography, one company upright in public, another slanting behind it, and a third that existed only in invoices that always rounded to clean numbers. "Roundness is a tell," Tunde murmured, drawing circles. "Real life stutters." He typed Naledi and Tuli, and a grid lit up with consultancy lines marching neatly across months, then thinned into a series of larger, hungrier transfers. "He's building a runway and testing wind," Tunde said. Amina's phone trembled on the table, and the first alert bloomed, 50,000 to an account ending 1735. An hour later, 120,000 to NN Advisory. Just after sunset, 999 sent to a foreign bank she'd never heard of, then reversed, then sent again. "He's probing the fence," Tunde said. "Tomorrow he'll try to drive a truck through it." He printed a checklist that felt like armor. Inventory of joint property, scans of passports, Zuri's school and medical records, board contacts, auditors' names, then handed her 3 blank sheets titled Contemporaneous Note, Do Not Embellish. When her eyebrows lifted, he smiled with one corner of his mouth. When your heart runs, memory sprints after whatever shouts the loudest. Notes make truth walk. He slid across a cheap feature phone, no apps, no clouds, just battery and purpose, and saved his number as Auntie Sarah. "Never discuss the plan on your main. Use this for everything that matters." She left his noon-burned Kampala clean and bright, carrying the handset like it was both a match and a fire extinguisher, and at home she staged normal with the precision of a surgeon counting sponges. Pilau simmering, onions surrendering to oil, homework checked, praise poured in measured spoonfuls while Zuri practiced her lines for morning assembly. Kato arrived dressed like a promise, fresh shirt, polished shoes, a bouquet arranged to look thoughtful, and kissed Amina's cheek with a gentleness that felt rehearsed. He joked about traffic, called the board nervous, kept his phone screen down as if the light might betray him, and asked whether they could go to the lake on Saturday. She smiled, placed the flowers in the lye and water with the same motion, and asked about his day until his answers came out in copy-paste portions. After Zuri slept and the ceiling fan sliced the dark into manageable pieces, she carried his suit jacket to the wardrobe, fingers ghosting the inner pocket with a housekeeper's courtesy. A heavy card slid into her palm: Avalon Hotel, private rooms, 6th floor, with tomorrow's date printed in hall-clean fonts, and on the back a name in neat block letters: Adv B. Mukama. Her breath condensed into something measurable. She photographed the card with the burner, returned it to its nest, and closed the wardrobe like a lullaby for a dangerous animal. When Kato emerged toweling his hair, she was folding laundry that did not need folding, asking if he wanted ginger tea, noticing without looking that he checked his phone twice before he answered. In the blue hours, she sat at the kitchen table while the ceiling fan sliced the dark into manageable pieces and copied the Avalon details into a contemporaneous note: time, pocket, ink weight, serif on Avalon, the way her hands did not tremble because she had trained them not to. She packed a tote for tomorrow: the burner phone, wired earphones, a book she would not read, mints, scarf, cash, and a comb she strapped on like armor. She texted Tunde from the burner, Avalon, 1800, then deleted the thread and placed the handset behind an old recipe book where no one ever looked. Outside, dogs negotiated the night and a taxi idled somewhere forever. Inside, the house rehearsed breathing without lies. Before bed, she wrote 4 lines on the back of Zuri's spelling list: observe, record, preserve, protect, and slipped it into her bra like a talisman that did not beg gods, only discipline. At dawn, she dressed in clothes that belonged everywhere and nowhere: jeans, white shirt, plain flats, a cap that turned her face into a shadow, and kissed Zuri at the gate as the bell gathered children into river sounds. "Are you coming to assembly?" Zuri asked. "I'll be there," Amina said, and meant it about the next one, the one after the war. She drove through Kampala's churn, eucalyptus in the air from the dash freshener, and felt that strange, holy steadiness that comes when fear and purpose cancel each other out. The city widened before her like a throat about to speak truth, and she realized she was done whispering.
Amina arrived at the Avalon 10 minutes early, a shadow among shadows, and chose a corner seat in the lounge, where glass walls turned the 6th floor into an aquarium of power. She ordered mint tea she would not drink, and draped her scarf over the back of the chair. The burner phone slept in her tote, recording app primed, wired earphones coiled. At 6:07, Cato stepped from the lift wearing his victory suit and the smile he used for donors and board chairs, and a lean man with a hard briefcase joined him at the host stand. The maitre d' led them to a glass room 2 tables away. Amina lowered her gaze to her open book, slid the earphones in to disguise the wire, tapped record, and let the small red light vanish. Through the glass, voices thinned by air conditioning drifted through the glass. Advocate Mukama cleared his throat and arranged papers. Cato leaned forward, pen tapping a slow telegraph. "The draft petition is ready," the lawyer said. "On filing, we seek interim orders freezing her access. Your control of the residence should hold." Cato's jaw eased. "And custody?" "Alternating weekends pending study," the lawyer replied, "but we can anchor it with school logistics." Amina breathed once, shallow, and watched his hands draw circles over a page labeled strategy. She let the recorder capture every word. The waiter slipped in and out without fuss. "Transfers?" Cato asked. "We've moved the liquid portions offshore," the lawyer said. "We'll complete the sweep before she wakes." Cato chuckled. "She's soft. She won't see it coming." The words pricked her like nettles she chose to hold. She texted Tunde beneath the table, live, then returned to stillness so complete it was armor. For 40 minutes they sketched a theft and called it order. They mapped paths through banks whose logos once meant safety, rehearsed a narrative where Amina was forgetful, impractical, unfit to steer anything but the school run. The lawyer warned him to play loving husband 1 more week. Cato agreed, nodding at the instruction like a soldier. Amina studied the room's reflections and studied the glass. When the bill appeared, Advocate Mukama placed his card without a glance. Cato checked his phone, grinned at a message she did not need to see, and rose with relieved swagger. They exited through the service corridor. Amina stopped the recording, sealed the file in a folder named Recital, and let both her tea and her anger go cold. Tunde slid into the chair opposite, calm. He copied the audio to an encrypted drive and checked the signal. "This is enough to open the door," he said. "Tomorrow, Advocate Okoye kicks it off the hinges." He outlined emergency injunctions to preserve the estate, disclosure orders, a motion for supervised contact, a notice to the board. "No confrontation. Let paper speak until it shouts." Amina closed her book. "Paper will shout. I will whisper." They left separately and met in the parking basement. Tunde handed her a slim power bank and a second SD card. "Redundancy. 2 is 1, 1 is none." She almost smiled. On the drive home, Kampala wore its evening lights. Sellers lifted oranges. Bodas threaded traffic. At a red light, she played 10 seconds of the recording and felt her heartbeat steady as the voices confirmed her instinct. At home, she became performance again. Zuri practiced her lines for assembly. Amina cheered in the right places and set out bread for tomorrow's lunchbox. Cato arrived late, smelling of air conditioning, placed a box of pastries on the counter, and kissed her forehead. She thanked him, took a pastry and wrapped it for Zuri, then placed the recording's SD card beneath the spice tin no one touched. After Zuri slept, Cato reached for softness and explanations about stress. Amina offered chamomile and a smile that forgave nothing. He talked about a lake weekend, a promotion, how proud he was of their daughter. She counted the ways a man can fog a room with words. When he finally slept, one arm across a pillow, Amina went to the kitchen and wrote a note for morning. Lawyer, judge, bank, school. She added a 5th line, locks, and circled it twice. Before dawn, she emailed herself the audio inside a blank draft and printed a transcript header with time and location. She stood by the window and let the future arrange itself. A courtroom, a bank office, a trust deed with Zuri's name that would not smear. She tucked the burner into her pocket and the calm back into her bones. The city would wake soon. So would justice. She checked the door, set the alarm, kissed her child's brow, and let courage, patient and practical, sit beside her until sunrise in Kampala.
Advocate Adieze Okoye did not waste words, she sharpened them. In a conference room that smelled of ink and method, she read the transcript header Amina had printed, listened to a minute of Cato and Advocate Mukama casually plotting her disappearance from her own life, and slid the laptop back like a judge returning a verdict. "We file ex parte for preservation," she said, already marking a page. "Full asset freeze across domestic accounts, mirror orders to correspondent banks identified by your analyst, production of books and records under oath, mirrored imaging of his devices, supervised contact schedule for Zuri, passport surrender to neutral custody, and an emergency appointment of a forensic accountant." Tunde, punctual as a metronome, unfolded a schematic of Cato's company lattice, public entity feeding a consultancy that fed a hollow advisory where invoices rounded like stones on a riverbed, and pointed to the recurring name, Ntuli Advisory. Okoye tapped it once. "We ask for third-party disclosure against Miss Ntuli as well. If she is clean, she will welcome the light." She dictated affidavits. Amina swore them carefully, answering each question with a drum-tight voice that gave nothing but truth. A clerk in a bright Katinge skirt printed, stamped, collated. A messenger stood by the door like a sprinter under starter's orders. "We will go to the duty judge before lunch," Okoye said. "You will not call, text, hint, or flare a nostril at Mr. Cato. Surprise is our bailiff." At 11:42, they were ushered into chambers where shelves carried the dust of 1,000 urgencies. Okoye spoke in the tone of someone asking for water in a burning house, calm, exact, necessary. And the judge, brows pitched, read the exhibit list, lingered over the audio transcript, and signed with a measured hand. Preservation,
disclosure, imaging, custody, passports, third-party notices, penal notices attached like teeth. Serve immediately, the judge said, and when the seal hit paper, Amina felt the ground tilt toward fairness for the first time in months. The courier ran. Banks were served by noon. IT teams queued behind neutral experts to ghost copy Cato's phone and work laptop. The registrar sealed the passport order. A separate clerk walked orders to Zuri's school so attendance schedules could anchor supervised visits. Okoye's phone performed a silent opera of confirmations. Tunde's dashboard bloomed with errors as Cato's usual transfer scripts crashed into new walls. "He'll try 3 more times before he understands," Tunde said deadpan. "Then he'll call his lawyer, who will tell him nothing has gone wrong except his plan." Amina wanted to laugh and couldn't, so she poured it into motion. She texted Njeri to pick up Zuri for ice cream after assembly. She called the locksmith to change cylinders before dusk. She placed her marriage certificate and Zuri's birth record into a fresh envelope marked Originals. And she removed the framed wedding photo from the corridor, the way one removes a splinter, gently, decisively, without ceremony. At 2 o'clock, compliance officers at Cato's firm arranged an urgent conversation about unexplained outflows. At 3, the board chair emailed Okoye acknowledging receipt of the court orders and confirming his cooperation. At 4, the school counselor sent Amina a soft note about Zuri's routine, promising continuity through the storm. By 5, a process server returned with an affidavit of service. Cato had opened the door, taken the papers, set his jaw, and said nothing. The city breathed, untroubled. Clouds boiled over Kololo Hill. Boda Boda stitched traffic into impatience. Amina stood at the sink rinsing greens and felt normalcy like a costume that still fit only because she refused to outgrow it mid-battle. When Cato arrived, he did not perform. He prowled. "What have you done?" he asked, voice low, like they were neighbors behind the cupboards. "What the law allows," Amina answered, without heat. He paced to the window, spun back. "You'll destroy me." She folded a dish towel with priestly care. "You tried to erase me." He laughed without humor. "You won't win. I know people. So does a courtroom." And the silence that followed had edges. He reached for his phone, then remembered the imaging order and placed it down as if it burned. "The lake," he said suddenly, absurdly, clinging to a prop from an old scene. "Another time," Amina said, and it was not unkind. After dinner, Njeri texted from the gate. Zuri raced in, smelling of sugar and sunshine, and Amina gathered her close, breathing in the ordinary like medicine. When Zuri slept, the locksmiths replaced cylinders and trained the new keypad to a code Zuri chose. 7399, the number of letters in her 3 names. On her veranda, Amina read Okoye's final email of the day. "Custody interim to you. Structured visitation in a supervised space. All orders returnable in 14 days. The forensic accountant would begin at 9 a.m. and a senior constable would collect the passports at 8 a.m. Tonight," Okoye wrote, "you rest." Amina closed her eyes, let the words settle, and for the first time in a long while, believed they might be possible. She went inside, switched off the hall light, and let the house learn how to be a sanctuary again.
By morning, the city throbbed with consequence, and the house learned a new rhythm. Doorbell at 8 for the constable who collected passports with a courteous gravity. A polite knock at 9 as the forensic accountant unrolled cables and mirrored Cato's devices while he stood there, jaw set and hands empty, watching the geometry of his own undoing appear on screens that reflected him in cold squares. Amina moved through it all like a conductor with a quiet baton. Zuri's breakfast with extra pawpaw, a reminder about assembly lines, a soft kiss to her brow before Najiri's car whisked her to school with promises of after-class chapati.
At 10, the board chair's email shed its tact. An extraordinary session at 2, attendance compulsory. Compliance attached a list of irregular disbursements in the neutral tone of people who have decided to stop pretending water isn't fire. Tunde arrived in a gray jacket that made him disappear into corridors and set a folder on the kitchen island. Draft trust deed for Zuri Amina Kato Trust, trustees independent, audits quarterly, guardian ad litem named, distributions restricted to education, health, housing, and a future that would not have to ask permission. Within the preservation order, he said, we can concentrate the frozen joint balance into the child's vehicle under the court's supervision, protects the estate from further games, and anchors custody in best interests. Advocate Okoye nodded, her pen already anticipating signatures. We execute at the main branch before lunch while his transfers are still stumbling. Amina smoothed the pages with a palm that did not shake and thought of Zuri's handwriting, wide, earnest letters that believed paper was a promise. Then dressed in the same neutral clothes she had chosen for days now, garments that did not tell rooms who to be. At the bank, a manager with a careful tie led them to a private room, as if escorting a patient toward anesthesia. Orders were verified, seals admired, phone calls placed to legal to confirm that yes, the court's teeth were real. Terminals woke with a pale glow. We will, per order, segregate the joint accounts into the minor's trust, the manager said, fingers hovering over keys like birds uncertain of wind. Line by line, the balances traveled across the screen, current, savings, brokerage sweep, tilting into a single destination whose name looked like a doorway, Zuri Amina Kato Trust. The number settled into place with the soft finality of chairs pushed in after a meeting no one would revisit. At 11:40, Kato strode in fast, the scent of panic walking 3 steps ahead of him. He saw the screens, saw Amina, saw Okoye's calm and Tunde's polite stillness, and chose volume. "This is theft," he said to the room without looking at the orders that made the air dense around him. The manager gestured to the stamped bundle. "Within a judicial preservation framework," he replied, "that special bank language that says we follow the biggest handwriting." Okoye's voice was silk drawn against a blade. "You engineered a clandestine sweep, Mr. Kato. The law has chosen the child first." He laughed, a torn sound. "You're ruining me." Tunde checked his watch. "Your plan was doing excellent work on that front." Kato leaned toward Amina, lower now, almost intimate. "We can fix this if you stop. I'll resign the petition. We go to the lake. Zuri will have what you tried to take," Amina said, so gently the syllables felt padded. "And she will have peace." He stared, something calculating in his eyes, dissolving like sugar on a hot tongue, and for a heartbeat, the boy he had been flickered and was gone. The manager clicked confirm. A receipt ribboned from the printer like a white flag that did not belong to him. Outside, Boda engines stitched noon into haste. Inside, a clerk brought tea no one touched. Kato's phone buzzed. Compliance summons. Board meeting moved up. Counsel unavailable until after court. He looked suddenly smaller in the glass reflection, a man discovering that consequence has a spine. "This isn't over," he said, but even his threat sounded like an old script he no longer believed. Amina signed the trust deed. The pen felt light. When she wrote AMINA, she felt a weight leave and something heavier arrive, the responsibility of winning. They left him with the manager reciting procedures as if prayer could teach a drowning man to breathe. On Kampala Road, the light was hard and honest. Vendors lifted trays. A school bus barked laughter at the curb. Amina called the school counselor to confirm Zuri's pickup and asked about the art show on Friday. She said yes to glue sticks, no to glitter, and smiled at the practical weather of ordinary needs. At home, she moved pictures into new places. Zuri on a swing, newly centered. Wedding photo wrapped in brown paper and laid in a drawer that would not open by accident. Okoye's email chimed with the board's acknowledgement of service and the regulator's polite request for full cooperation. Tunde forwarded a still of another failed transfer, an error box that had learned to say no, and a text, "Media sniffing, say nothing." She planned dinner,
breathed, and told the lilies Kato had brought earlier that they could live in the laundry room for now. When Zuri spilled into the sitting room at 4, cheeks sugared and eyes bright, Amina gathered her slow and held the hug 2 seconds longer than usual and answered the small, brave question, "Are we okay?" She said, "We are safe," and in her mouth the word safe stopped being a wish and became architecture. That night, while the city traded heat for wind and thunder mumbled somewhere toward Namanwe, Amina sat on the veranda with Najiri and told the story in the new tense, not what he would do, but what he had tried, not what she feared, but what she had built. Najiri laughed, cried, squeezed her hand, and left a tub of stew on the counter like proof that love is a logistics skill. Amina locked the new locks, checked the sleeping child twice, and wrote tomorrow's list: hearing prep, board watch, school art show, buy shoes 2 sizes up because children insist on futures. In the quiet afterward, she let a single tear track down and did not wipe it. Salt for a sacrifice, water for a seed, and told the night, softly, but with administrative clarity, that the storm had work to do, and so did she.
The boardroom felt refrigerated, a place where money expected obedience. And Cato walked in with the brittle brightness of a man who had rehearsed a victory speech and found the wrong audience. On the wall, a screen displayed the agenda. Beneath it, faces arranged themselves into a tribunal disguised as colleagues. The chair invited him to sit and to assist the board in understanding recent irregularities. Compliance began, voice neutral as a ledger, a run of rounded invoices to Ntuli Advisory, time-split wires to foreign correspondence, internal approvals forged by a login used at 3:11 a.m. from a device now under court imaging. Cato tried confidence, then charm, then indignation. Each slid off the table. When he asked who had authorized the witch hunt, the chair tapped the stamped court orders in the corner of the slide. "We didn't," he said. "The Republic did." Silence laid itself down. Minutes later, the resolution moved, seconded, and carried. Suspension pending investigation. Access revoked. Records preserved. Security collected his badge and the laptop he had once treated like a second mouth. He left the building with a cardboard box and a face no longer curated for cameras. Outside, media air began to thin around his name. Inside, Okoye's email arrived with a different weather. The family court had ratified the trust transfer within the preservation order and confirmed interim custody in Amina's favor with supervised contact on Saturdays at the Family Resource Center. Amina read the order in her kitchen, while Zuri glued sequins to cardboard for the school art show, and she felt in her chest the architecture of safety add another beam. She packed a small backpack for Saturday, a storybook, sanitizer, a notebook where Zuri could draw, and wrote the center's address on a sticky note for the driver. When Cato texted at dusk, the message was almost tender. "For Zuri's sake, no supervision. We can manage this like adults." Amina answered with a photo of the order and the sentence, "We will follow the court." He replied with nothing. By morning, Tunde forwarded a note. Naledi had resigned from 2 boards and her consultancy's website had vanished. The regulator wrote to the company requesting explanations. Okoye placed a brief call. The police financial crimes unit had opened a preliminary file. "Do not engage," she said. "We will answer only to the court." Amina agreed and put her phone face down beside a bowl of oranges. She ironed Zuri's uniform, tightened a loose button, and reminded herself that ordinary tasks are not small. They are the scaffolding that keeps a life upright while storms argue overhead. Saturday came dressed as procedure. The resource center was a low building painted with bright fish. Inside, a counselor with soft shoes explained the rules. Zuri hugged Amina's waist, then accepted the counselor's hand. When Cato entered, he tried a smile that misremembered how it worked.
He knelt to Zuri's height and asked about school. Zuri told him about art glue and a stubborn glitter star. For 1 hour, the room was a field of small talk. Cato glanced at Amina through the glass, then at the clock, then returned to a puzzle with his daughter. When the bell chimed, Zuri waved. He pressed his palm to the glass. Amina offered a nod that acknowledged both history and boundary. In the car, Zuri asked, "Is Daddy in trouble?" Amina said, "Daddy made mistakes. Grown-ups fix mistakes by telling the truth and doing better." It was not everything, but it was honest enough for 8. That evening, Rain rehearsed on the iron roof. Njeri came with stew and a laugh that disinfected the room. They sat on the veranda while frogs tuned the night. "How does victory feel?" Njeri asked. Amina considered. "Like a clean ledger. No triumph, just balance." Her phone buzzed, an unknown number promising an interview and sympathy. She blocked it. Another buzz, the school reminding parents about Friday's art show. She smiled, wrote "buy ribbon" on a list, and underlined it twice. Before bed, Amina reviewed the timeline with the diligence of a bursar. Next hearing in 10 days, forensic report in 7, supervised visits to continue, locks changed, passwords rotated. She placed the wrapped wedding photo deeper in a drawer, then centered a different frame on the shelf. Zuri, mid-laugh, hair lifted by playground wind, a joy that refused to be collateral. She switched off the light and stood in the kind of darkness that does not threaten, rests. In that pause, she told herself the truest version of it yet. He had tried to pull the floor from beneath her, and she had learned to pour concrete. Tomorrow would bring paperwork and another storm, but foundations do not panic, they hold. And in holding, they teach the house above them how to breathe again.
On the morning the case returned to court for final orders, Kampala woke washed and bright, and Amina felt the peculiar quiet that visits just before a verdict, like a drumhead stretched tight, waiting for the first strike. She braided Zuri's hair, pinned a tiny ribbon the color of dawn at the base, and left her with Njeri, who packed snacks and a prayer that sounded mostly like laughter. At the courthouse, Advocate Okoye arranged her files with a ritual's precision. Tunde sat behind them, a silhouette of patience, the forensic report tucked under his arm like a sealed weather system. Katu arrived clean-shaven, in a navy suit that wanted to be a character witness, flanked by fresh counsel and followed by the thin hum of gossip. The judge entered. Pages rustled. Okoye stood and let the evidence walk. The recording from the Avalon where a plan to freeze her out seemed to forget microphones exist. Bank trails curving toward shells that looked like companies until math asked questions. The prenup clause that bent in 2 places, adultery and concealment, and snapped cleanly under both. Tunde summarized the forensic harvest without cruelty. Late-night logins, rounded invoices, offshore rehearsals, a consultancy that billed for strategic silence. Kato's counsel tried narrative, stressed executive, marital drift, misunderstandings at scale, but the transcript on the screen had fewer adjectives. When the judge spoke, it was with the gravity of a spreadsheet balanced to the last shilling. Preservation orders made permanent, pending division. Full disclosure with penalties for omissions. Appointment of an independent receiver for disputed interests. Finalization of the minor's trust with audits quarter by quarter. Interim custody to Amina confirmed. Visitation structured. A parenting program mandated. Passports to remain under neutral seal until compliance and candor prove themselves in daylight. There was a soft sound in the room, the sound of a future fastening. Outside, the sky had the hard blue of a promise kept. Reporters leaned forward. Amina kept her face an unreadable kindness and gave the only statement she intended to give. None.
In the afternoon, the company board issued its own music: formal termination for cause, cooperation with regulators, a letter to staff reminding them that ethics are not decorations. Naledi and Tuli, discovered not vanishing but simply smaller in the light, surrendered devices and signed a statement that placed dates on everything. The consultancy shuddered, its website a plaque to absence. At home, Amina boiled water for tea and stood at the sink as the kettle began to speak, letting the day settle inside her bones like rain entering ground that had forgotten how to drink. Zuri burst in with glue on her fingers and a grin full of gap teeth, waving a certificate from the art show, Best Use of Sunshine. And Amina, who had spent months identifying storms, felt that title rearrange the furniture of her chest. They celebrated with chapati and a silly dance that made the lilies in the laundry room look like a listening audience. Later, as crickets tuned the evening and thunder rehearsed somewhere toward Mukono, Amina took the wrapped wedding photo from the drawer, unwrapped it without malice, and slid it behind a stack of tax folders, not erased, simply archived. Then centered a new frame on the hall table: Zuri beneath a mango tree, ribbon a small dawn at her neck, eyes arguing cheerfully with gravity mid-jump. Njeri arrived with jollof and a joke about crowns that do not fall off even when their owners run. They ate on the veranda. Complicated gratitude threaded the air. Gratitude for paper that had teeth, for friends who moved like bridges, for discipline that chose notes over noise. When the night was deep enough to invite truth, Amina admitted the hardest part: not catching the betrayal, but choosing not to become it. "I wanted to scorch the earth," she said, "but Zuri needs roads." Jerry nodded. Queens build roads. Arsonists get warm for a moment. Before bed, Amina wrote tomorrow's small list: school shoes, citrus for the house, call mom, and a longer one for the week: meet trustees, set Zuri's reading nook, plant 2 succulents that do not ask for much and live a long time. She texted Okoye a simple thank you, and Tunde a picture of the ribbon with 3 words: best use indeed. Alone, she stood by the window and looked at a city that had carried her across a tightrope she hadn't known she could survive. Kato would keep learning that consequences are patient. Courts would go on measuring. Life stubbornly would insist on ordinary miracles like homework and ripe avocados and the way a child's laugh corrects the spelling of a room. When she finally slept, it was the clean sleep of someone who had counted, recorded, preserved, and protected, and had not forgotten herself in the arithmetic. In the morning, she woke before dawn, brewed tea, and watched sunlight climb the wall, the humble miracle of a house breathing because its foundations had been poured with care. If anyone had asked for a moral, she would have offered only logistics. Love your child first, write things down, believe what you see, and never confuse silence for surrender. Then she would have tied a small ribbon in a small girl's hair and walked out into a day that had already decided to be merciful.